we'll go ahead and get started as soon as, there we go, audio is connected. So good morning, everyone. Wanted to take a moment as people are slowly joining onto the call to just welcome you all to our March P3 subcommittee meeting. We have several guests on the call, so I just want to take a real quick second to go through and introduce ourselves just so we know who's on the call. I'll go ahead and start in the order of which your squares are on my screen. So if you turn on your camera and you move people around, then I will move around with you. Carrie, can you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Carrie Schiff. I'm a commission member.
And Alethea?
Hi, everyone. I'm Alethea Gomez, the Director of Programs and Initiatives at EPIC, Executives Partnering to Invest in Children.
Janelle?
Hi, I'm Janelle Weaver. I'm a Senior Marketing Consultant at WSP.
Simon?
Simon Tafoya, EDC Commissioner.
John?
Good morning, everybody. John Triba with WSP.
Steve?
Stephen Pallets, I'm an EDC Commissioner.
David?
Morning, everybody. I made it just in time. David Dragoo, EDC Commissioner.
Tim?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Tim Barr. I'm the Office Practice Leader of Canon Design here in Denver.
And then Tim Dixon? If you're talking, we can't hear you. Okay, we'll come back. And Myron.
I'm Myron Hora, the Colorado Planning Lead for WSP.
Okay. Nice to meet everybody. And Virginia.
Virginia Davis, OEDIT staff.
I think I got everybody because the squares were jumping around. So I think I've got everyone on the screen. If not, I apologize. But please just go ahead and type in the chat who you're with. Wanted to give you all a quick update in regard to our program manager. So we were able to hire Suzanne Ray as our new program manager with the Department of Personnel and Administration. And so she started on the 27th of, what month is it? February of February. She's in her second week and we're moving forward pretty quickly. We will get a bio up about her in regard to her background and experience, but then also just want to make sure that you all know that she is a resource to you all. She does have her contact information available on the internet, but I think she's working on something right now. So she might join us a little bit later. Wanted to go through, she does have a real estate background and a real estate license. So that's a really good perk for us in regard to our workforce and how we're going to be doing a lot of our projects. And then also you'll see on the website an update where we have added Doug Platt. We have been getting some media coverage on some of the projects that we're potentially looking at financing. And so wanted to make sure we had a continuous contact for media. So Doug Platt is also listed on our team for any communications and media contact moving forward for the office. So that's really exciting. I've got the agenda up. I did move a couple things around really quickly because of some people's timing. So I just want to make sure that we're able to address some of the things that we've got going on. Carrie, did you have something? Sorry.
Nope.
Okay, sorry. So for program updates, several things. We do have the Burnham Yard RFP. We plan on making an announcement sometime this week. So we're working with our procurement director on that. So she will be communicating with all organizations that did bid on that particular project. And so the announcement should come out either this week or early next week on who was the selection for that particular project. In relation to that project also, we do have several things going on right now. And I know as EDC commissioners, you guys are very interested in the projection of that project. And so we have gotten information in regard to the rail alignments and different options that we have. We did complete 28 interviews of stakeholders that are either adjacent or in close proximity to that particular area. And we are creating a briefing booklet for our mayoral candidates that we will then be giving out to the mayoral candidates as the election for mayor, for Denver mayor, starts to progress forward. That briefing booklet is to basically make sure that everybody's aware of where we currently stand with the transportation study, when that will be completed, which is May of 2023, and then how we will then move to our next phase. The Colorado Transportation Investment Office, CTIO, will be issuing a solicitation as well for their NEPA process. So NEPA will start sometime later on this year. And then the city and county of Denver does have a small area plan that they are working on for that particular project that will move forward. I'm not sure when they're going to issue that particular solicitation, but they are in the process of hiring a TOD manager, which I am sitting on the interview panel for that particular position. So I know that they're going to move forward with the small area plan. So a lot of moving parts on Burnham. We will have a report out. Nick and I will do a more detailed report out probably in April for you all that'll go through the transportation alignment options. It'll also look at next steps with NEPA. I just kind of wanted to give you an idea that the project has been moving forward pretty quickly. And we are looking at next steps as we move forward with Burnham on that particular portion. Any questions on that project? Okay, perfect. The next one that I wanted to bring up to you all is the Steamboat Springs RFQ that was issued through the city of Steamboat. You may have seen an article in regard to this project. What it is it is a CDOT parcel of land. It's 1.14 acres that is located in the city of Steamboat. They would like to, in partnership with the P3 office, as well as the city and the county, put together what we're calling a conceptual design, which is what that RFQ was for, in order to determine, is this parcel of land really going to be able to support a first floor early childcare center, in addition housing floors 2 through 4, 2 through 5 for the community. Right now, that process, they have not made the announcement on which selected vendor we have, but they will be making the selection and the announcement. And then we will help with the conceptual design to make sure that this is the right plot of land to utilize versus any other plot of land that we might have. Epic has done some work with them. So Alethea, I don't know if you want to comment on that particular site, on why there is belief that this is a good site for that particular project to move forward. I don't know if you want to provide any insight. Don't mean to put you on the spot for that one.
No, that's okay. There's a lot of advantages to this particular site. It's adjacent to the transport center, and it also has a walkway and direct access to parks and rivers, and it's highly accessible to parents along the main drag, and also the size and accommodation of the site. It makes a lot of sense to build further on that site for the county and the partners involved here. So it was really exciting to discover that and find out the ownership and see this forming into a partnership. So really this is about right access, size, and just the overall positioning in relationship to housing for employees as well.
Thanks, Alethea. And I'm going to share the document that was put out by the city that helps you understand the scope of work that will be done for this particular project. Let me see if I can make it a little bit bigger. Uh-oh, I'm really bad at the sizing on it. Here we go. So this is a layout of what the project description is. So in short, there's a conceptual design to determine that multi-use space that's located off of Lincoln Ave and Highway 50. And so here's the scope of services that were desired. We'll look at the building program for the childcare for the childcare center, and then 1, 2, and 3 bedroom apartments, 8 apartments being the minimum number. And then also the site plan and design, building design to address any anticipated zoning. This particular site is located on a floodplain, so we know that there will be some mitigation efforts that need to happen with that particular site. And then what it does not include are these things that are listed right here. So civil engineering, a landscape plan, wetland study, which actually has been done, so we don't need to do that. Traffic study if required, which we know will need to be done. And we're working in partnership with CDOT as our state partner to determine any expansion of any roadways that are going to happen so that we can make sure we don't interfere with any of those particular plans as it moves forward. So that's kind of the scope of what we have. Once we have a vendor selected, what I'll do is I will bring that information back to this group. to understand better like what next steps are, what we find from that particular plan, and how we either move forward or move to the next phase of that particular project. So that's really important to recognize. This is a conceptual design, trying to understand if this is the right site to be utilized, and have a lot of partners in the ball game that are coming forward. The county is also working with us on this, so it is a local commitment that they've made, and as well as the city. So it's really exciting to see that partnership come together as a team as we look at the different opportunities that we have for this particular site.
Are you working with Gary Suter at the county on that? Is that who you guys are working with? Okay,
Yep.
Great. Gary's
Yes.
awesome.
Yeah, he's great. And then as you all probably know, Beth Melton used to be the commissioner there. We were working with her, but now we're working with her, with Tim, who is also county commissioner. So we do have a commissioner on board from the county. We have Gary, who's from the city, and then we also have a planner from the city as well. So we have a pretty good team coming together to try to figure out the best use for that particular site. Any questions on that project? The next piece that I wanted to update you on is the Dallas conference. So we just got back from the Dallas conference for the P3 conference, and that was a really cool experience. There are a lot of things that have gone into the P3 conference. If you all remember, I went to the one in DC that was the government conference, and then this one was a bigger scope. So we're talking about things from water use, what is a P3 project. A lot of cities and states are starting to look at creation of a P3 office. So, reaching out and trying to figure out, what's the best practice? How do we incorporate O&M? How do we look at sustainability? All the things that we've been kind of talking through in relation to some of the unsolicited proposals that we've received. And so that's been really important conversation nationwide. So it was really an awesome experience to be able to go through that. We are going to go through what is called the P3 certification program. And so that will be a year-long certification process where we are working with experts all across the industry, taking classes, investing, in our time and education to make sure that we're able to provide the right scope for some of the projects that we're receiving, either through a solicited or unsolicited process. And so that certification process started last Wednesday, and then it runs all the way through next year. So the first Wednesday of every month, I will be going through some intense training on different things that we can do with P3 in the state of Colorado, getting some best practices, understanding the next steps, and then also making sure that we have a true understanding and a true desire to fund and finance the projects in the most replicable manner that we have. I know we've received some proposals that we've reviewed, and then others that were like, is this a P3? Is it not? And so hopefully that training will be able to help us go through a little bit more understanding of what is financeable, what are things that we should look at, and what are not things that we should look at. So hoping to share more with you all in regard to that training. I will be sending out the slide decks that were shared with us. So we learned about financing as one, operation and maintenance as another training, and then also risk allocation. So Seth Gabriel is going to be coming and talking to us about innovation per the request of you all in regard to what does innovation really look like? What do innovative projects look like from a P3 perspective? So he'll be joining us at 10:45 today, but we will also look at, risk allocation. Do we need screening criteria? Are there certain things that we should be looking at that we're not paying attention to at this point in time? So we'll bring a lot of best practices into that discussion as we move forward with the certification process. So that was the Dallas conference. Any questions, concerns? You guys are quiet today. Awesome. The last thing I want to
lucky, Natrice. It's coming. It's coming.
It's coming. I'm like, I'll wait for it. I'm gonna wait for it. The last thing I want to talk through is the Stratton project. They did submit additional information in regard to that project. So I do want to take some time to discuss, are there any updates? I know that some of you have sent over an updated scoring sheet for that particular project. Let me pull up their submission really quickly so I can share it for those who haven't seen it. But are there any things that we want to talk about in relation to that project while Natrice is frantically trying to find the submission update?
Does anyone have a highlight of the project amendments that they sent in and what details those addressed specifically?
That's what I'm pulling up right now.
Great.
All right. Can you all see? Why is everything so small today? So here we go. So in relation to some of the questions that we had last time, Alethea, I did include also the questions that you had on this document. So the answers are provided here. I will just highlight that there is an increase in requests. So it was $1 million to begin with, and now we're looking at a $2 million request. Sorry, let me scroll down. It's $2 million, 2.3 million in excess that's now being asked for, and I can't find it on here. Let me scroll back up. We'll start at the top and go down. So the question was, can we look at a funding plan for the entire building and operating costs for the center? They have 3-year pro forma that they had shared with us in the past that shows a 3-year trend with increased capacity. And so the attached pro forma was provided to us earlier in the process. Hang on 1 second. Simon, I want to bring up one of the questions that you had asked originally in regard to projects and making sure that we are addressing them. This feels like a grant request to me, in my opinion. I don't know if anyone else agrees, disagrees with that.
I agree with that, and it sort of has me stuck in being able to understand moving forward on it. So I was sort of holding off on till we have the training I think we're getting today on how you can take a project like this and generate revenue back for the state, because I'm just not sure that the economics seem so tight for these projects and we need to support them, but I just don't know how to thread that needle.
I agree. Any other comments? I mean, when we're looking at I'm trying to look at 2 separate screens here. When we look at the dollars that they had submitted, the initial request for this particular project, as you may or may not remember, it is not on state land. So that is one of the things that we have in our criteria in our legislation that says we're supposed to utilize the state land. The estimated value of the project was approximately 3.6 million. And so there was $1 million that they were requesting from DOLA, which I don't know that there's been an award made on that quite yet. And so now the construction cost that they are asking us for is 2.3 million. Simon, I saw you unmuted.
Oh, sorry, no,
Nothing, okay.
I'm listening.
Okay, perfect. So we went from $1 million request at the P3 office that's not currently on state land to now 2.3 million. And so that's just another thing I want to highlight on this. Construction costs on all of our projects are going to continue to increase because inflation is not going down. So the cost of construction is going to continue to increase and go up. Another question that we had asked was the data that was supporting the current population. And then also if there was going to be any CCAP provided. And so this was the answer that they had provided there. Alethea, I think that might have been your question. I can't remember if that was or not.
Yeah, I was asking about the populations served because of the pro forma assumptions around generating a profit in years 2 and 3. And then of course the teacher wages, right, that are required in order to achieve those pro forma bottom lines, and just understanding what market research had been done, if any, right, on the population, the potential educator population, and then things like income and accessibility, right, for the parents that would potentially use this center. I think that's important when you're having an ask of this size from this department, especially when there's contingencies to the statute, right, around state land and things like that. A data-rich rationale, I think, would just be a good approach here, I think was my previous comment to them.
Okay. Any additional comments? And here's the data that they provided as far as miles from Stratton, the types of students that would be served, and then CCAP funding. I don't know that this answer addressed your question in regard to the teacher performance or teacher pay. The original pay that they had provided as far as what would go out to an educator, I know was of a concern to you.
I think, just skimming over the information that they've shared here, I think the basic information that they're sharing is people don't earn as much income as the rest of the state here in Stratton. So they generally have perhaps lower income expectations overall than the rest of the state. And so they're helping, I believe, to justify their decisions for both wages and daily rates based on what they're sharing here. I believe they had the director at 39,000. I think we shared some concerns around recruitment and retention and how those expectations might be built into the pro forma. And so I think we're looking for those types of answers, right? Will this center be sustainable based on the economic data that's collected? And so it looks like this is supporting that, right? Potentially, if the CCAP rate reimbursement is close to the daily rate, then they can most likely depend on the pro forma that they've put forward. Early education population is always going to be a question mark as far as the educators, I should say.
Okay. Any other comments on the information that was sent to the commissioners in regards to this project? Nope. Okay. So what I'd like to ask commissioners, if you have not sent your scoring to me in regard to this project, please do so. And then we will make a final decision on whether or not it will be financed or not. You have the information that was submitted from the previous presentation by the client, and then also you have the updated supplemental information. So if there's any updates that you need to make, can you please send that to me by next Friday, if possible, so then we can make a decision on whether or not we choose to finance this project or not. Thank you.
And then I just had one more question about the training that Carrie Schiff mentioned that's happening tomorrow. Is that specific to drawing revenue from childcare projects, or is that more generalized to just the potential for projects that may generate low to no revenue for the state?
Which training are you tomorrow?
I thought it was today. It was, you were bringing someone to talk about P3 projects and how.
Oh yeah, Seth is here.
Yeah,
He's
it's
here.
Today.
It's today. Sorry. I was like, which training tomorrow? I don't have that on my calendar.
Sorry, I thought I heard tomorrow. My apologies. Okay.
No, it's today. And Alethea, it actually focuses on P3 as a whole. So it's not just focused on childcare. It's focused on how do we, from an innovative perspective, really look at P3 projects for the state, whether it's housing, early childcare, behavioral health, and broadband. Because one of the things that we've had is, we're getting unsolicited proposals and they're great projects, right? But are they really P3s, right? And so that's what we're trying to figure out. And, a couple of commissioners brought up, some of these requests feel like grant requests versus an actual P3 project. And so that's really what the training is to focus on. And Seth is here. So when it's his turn, we will go into that training and he has slides. So we will have slides and we'll have a good discussion about what that means for everybody.
Thanks for spending time on that clarification.
No problem. Before I go into the 1881 Pierce Street discussion, Simon, you wanted to bring up a issue with timing and scheduling. So do we want to talk about that while we still have you on? Because I know you have to drop in at the hour. Does 10 a.m. not work for you anymore?
Oh, to that timing and scheduling. I was like, timing and scheduling 1881 Pierce. No, just the 10 to noon is hard for me, has become harder for me. So if we could do earlier, great. If not, then I'll just attend when I can.
Okay. Any other, I know we picked this time in like September. So in September of 2022, this might have worked as a time. Do we want to move it to a different time earlier in the day? What works for others? I
can go earlier. I wouldn't mind going earlier. That's usually more helpful to me.
It's same, because it's, for me, it cuts in the middle of the day, and kind of similar to our commission meetings. I think the earlier the better.
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree with Teresa. 8 to 10 sounds right, just because we're used to it. But you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but that seems like a better time to get it. Kind of come in and get it done and then get going.
Okay.
I agree with that.
Okay. So since all of us agree on that, what I'll do, Virginia, I'll work with you to change the time. So we'll still have it on the Tuesday, but we'll make it at an earlier time so that we can have all of you here, because I do really value everyone's opinion on these projects and on some of the things that we're doing. So we'll look at moving April through the rest of the year to 8 o'clock. I know we picked it in September, so it's fine. I'm glad we're discussing it and can move it to an earlier time. Doesn't change the date, just a couple hours earlier, which is fine for me. Perfect. All right. Other piece, Simon, I don't mean to keep calling you out, but there's some other things I want to discuss before you leave. In relation to our scoring criteria, we started off with a document that was in Word format. There's been some suggestions made on, can we not have to do math? Can we formulate it so that it's in an Excel spreadsheet that actually you can just enter your score and it tabulates for you, and then it gives you what it is that you scored on. Discussion on that. Is it easier for us to have something that tabulates the scores for us? David, you always do the math. And I'm like, that's what math we're using. That's how I wanted to have it, but we have weighted categories. I don't know if an Excel spreadsheet works better for everybody if we change that and put it into Excel. Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, so I could do the math, but it was just, just having that layout rather than the Word document. It just makes more sense to me, especially if it could just be an Excel document. And then I think generally speaking, as we get all of this information, having it in one document so that we can just say, this is the one project. And then, because right now, this is being, kind of picky, I get it. But when we're going through these documents and we're going, shifting from one thing to the other, it's a, more of a board book style versus just attachments and with the scoring in Excel.
Okay. Can you all access Google Drive or no?
I can, but
you can. David, can you? I don't know, Carrie, David.
I don't use it generally, but I think if you invite somebody to your Google Drive, we can get into it.
Yeah.
But I don't have a Google Drive that I use personally, so I would need to get invited to yours, I think.
Yeah, part of this. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I don't mind. I like the idea of, as Simon's suggesting, of putting this kind of collating it more, because I found it hard sorting through, like, which was this map for? Was this first for AHEC? What was this for? Like, and so having that combined, I'm struggling in some of these instances to actually put numbers in the scorecards. If you put it in Excel, I may be forced to. But I'm sort of like, well, how do I score innovation here? I don't even know what innovation means yet in this context. And so it's, I'm probably not being very helpful with numbers to start with.
Do you feel like the way in which I can put it in Excel, so that's easy, that's an easy shift, and then putting it in an actual PDF file so that you guys can just scroll through the document and know what goes with what, those are easy fixes. As far as the ratings, we had looked at the ratings before months ago. Do we feel like these ratings, now that we've seen a couple of projects, are actually reflective? And maybe we want to wait till Seth's presentation on what we're looking for in regard to the scoring and screening criteria.
I'd like to wait till after Seth's presentation myself.
Okay.
At risk of, well, number one, yes, I agree. I would like to wait, but there's a little bit of me thinking that, because in most of these, I don't know what I don't know. And but in my head, it goes to a place, when I'm reading these, that there's a lot missing. And obviously, like, it's about what you're giving in terms of information, but if they could all be kind of standard, especially as it relates to the finances, because the finances should be, the numbers are numbers, right? And all that should be clear as to where the money is originating from, how that fits into the economic model for the project. And then the more qualitative side, which is why, what their interpretation of why this is innovative, interpretation of why this is X, Y, and Z, whatever the, those parameters are, so that we can at least every time go in and have the same model for reviewing these things. And if there's something missing, we know pretty clearly, and we don't have to search for it through all these multiple documents. That's what I think would be helpful.
Okay.
Yeah, and Trish, not to give you more work, but just a reference point, like the EDO grants that we're reviewing right now at OEdit and some of the outdoor recreation ones, there's just a programmatic thing you do on Salesforce, and then you kind of track it, just like Simon's saying, it kind of tracks it for you. Not that you'd have to input all of them, but you know, that may be something to explore if you're interested. It's easy,
Yeah.
kind of take you through it, you score it, you're done, and then that's how it works.
And I think it should be, you should only really have to do it once, which I think moving forward, regardless of who's on this committee or commission, you know, it should be a new standard that the new person should be able to adopt. So it should make your life easier in the long run when you're retraining a new commissioner.
Okay. I'll look into the application for Salesforce because we do have that at DPA. I'll just reach out to our IT person and see if we can get that established. What I'll also look at is plugging this information into a format that makes it easier for you all to utilize instead of having to send it back over to me in a Word document and calculate the math. And then as far as the screening criteria, what we're doing now that I have a program manager is that we're looking at scoring criteria, screening criteria. If it doesn't meet XYZ, if it's not innovative, if it's not like, and how are we defining that? We're looking at revamping that. So starting July 1, we'll probably have something very different than, not very different, but different than what we've been utilizing for the last year since we're in this startup phase. So all your comments are not giving me more work. It's just giving us more ways to be efficient. So thank you for that. All right. Any other comments on this topic while I have everybody? Nope. Okay, perfect. The only other two things that I just wanted to give you a quick synopsis of are the 1881 Pierce project. We are not putting any money specifically into this project. We have DPA has hired a consultant, which is AECOM, to help understand what we can do with 1881 Pierce, which is the DMV site in Lakewood. There are 3 parcels of land, 2 that are adjacent to the site, which if you've been to the DMV, I'm sure you're very familiar. They sit right next to the building. They flood. So we're looking at trying to get them off of our irrigation system and figure out the best use for those particular parcels. And then there's another parcel that's at 1901 Reed Street. That is a 5.3 acre parcel that is adjacent to a park. So we will be doing a solicitation for an RFI to start figuring out how we can better utilize that particular parcel of land. Obviously, we'll work with the city and the county and look at their area plans of what they plan on doing with that community. But as you all probably know, Casa Bonita is opening back up and it's right behind that site. So we're anticipating that there's the potential use of our parking lots. We want to make sure that that particular area is better utilized in a more efficient way. And then that 1901 Reed Street, what can we potentially do with that site? So more information to come on that particular site as we start doing that street study. I'll probably have our consultant come and talk to you all later on this summer after we do the site study, the site tour, and the site tour is not scheduled until next Monday. So I'll have more information for you probably April, May of the timeframe. So just wanted to keep you up to date on that one. And then finally, we have the DOC feasibility study that we're doing for early childcare. So the Department of Corrections would like to do an early childcare center for their staff. But first we need to figure out which parcel of land we want to utilize. So we have hired a consultant, and I can announce this because it's official. We have a PO. Alethea and her team, Nicole Riel over at Epic, will be helping us with the feasibility study for the Department of Corrections in relation to figuring out which site should we use or could we use to potentially do an early childcare project. I think with their experience and having worked with other state agencies on early childcare, I feel like you know, they have the needs and they understand the needs in that community, but it will go somewhere in Fremont County. I don't know if you wanted to say anything, Olivia, on that or not.
No, we're just so excited about the prospect of a project like this, not only utilizing state land, but serving a workforce population with unique needs like the DOC is really a wonderful opportunity. And I think the data from this project will be able to be utilized for future feasibility. So we're really excited to support.
Thanks, Alethea. We're excited to have you tell us what we should do, where we should do things, and how it should be done. Simon, you have a question?
Yeah, just I mean, it's great that we're looking into this. I wonder, you know, not just in this project and these projects generally, when you were looking at childcare, when you have a population that is commuting in from specific areas, do you consider, so I know you said Fremont County, but a good portion of the people who work in Fremont County at those prisons work in Pueblo County or live in Pueblo County. So I'm wondering if there's like, you know, if you're looking at Western Pueblo County versus Eastern, you know, or Central, like whatever makes sense, that we're not like, is it specifically Fremont, or say, for example, if it was Teller County and El Paso County, where those workforce sheds all work to, you know, kind of come together, are we limiting ourselves by saying this specific county, or are we giving the aperture to the project to allow the data to make the decision?
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. Where the workforce lives and where they commute from is going to be an important piece of the initial market and needs assessment data. So understanding not only where they live, but where their preference is, right, to have their children close to home versus close to work will vary heavily into the decisions that we make about, does it make sense, right, to do this on this site? And so employee needs are important, and we'll be pulling data from all the counties where they live and commute from as well to understand that data.
Okay, I heard not to put Patrice on the spot, but I heard definitely Fremont County, and I know that area relatively well, and it's pretty, that population, that workforce shed is kind of spread through El Paso, Pueblo, Fremont counties.
Yeah, no, you're not putting me on the spot. So there is a survey that's being done by Department of Corrections to get that information, to understand, are they commuting in? And that's part of the feasibility study. So I should have said that. We are doing a feasibility study in addition to a survey from the Department of Corrections to determine where their employees are commuting from and what hours they would need in order to be able to utilize that. Yes, the site is being proposed in Fremont County, but understanding from DOC, you also have workforce that's driving from Denver in some cases, which is crazy to me, but they're driving down from Denver as well as Pueblo County and commuting into that particular area for work. So they have a survey that they're doing internally to help us understand where people are commuting from in order to utilize the site.
Right. And it should be said that from experience with, you know, previous departments and organizations, it's second and third shift workers or people, anyone who goes to work and is there for a long time, right, during the day, longer shifts, do often prefer their children to be closer to their site of work, right, for things like access during the day to infants or when a child gets sick. And so it will be interesting to see what trends emerge from this specific population as well.
Yeah. And my underlying point is I just don't want to preclude something based on without seeing the data. That's my only point. Yeah.
Yep, understand. And we'll bring the data back to you all as soon as that survey is completed, so we can show what exactly it is that's being done. And then the final report that EPIC will provide for us, it'll have that information before we make a decision on any site or potential RFP that we would put out for a provider or for that site to have construction on it. Cool. All right, I am running on track sort of, and Seth is here, so I can start 5 minutes early. So we do have a presentation from Seth Miller-Gabriel. I will just give a quick tout. I sent you guys his bio, but he's also like one of my favorite people in regard to talking with us about P3s. He used to run the Washington, DC P3 office, so he can give kind of an update on what it is that he did there. But we did have a discussion about potential educational opportunities that we have for our commissioners in regard to what does innovative P3 projects look like? What are P3s and what are not P3s, as we start and continue to get unsolicited proposals as well as solicited proposals that we're putting out in relation to the P3 office. So Seth is here. He's got some presentation materials that he'd like to show you all, and I will be quiet for the next 30 minutes. Seth, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for having me. I'm trying to share my screen. I'm on one screen, so I'll try to be able to see everyone. Hopefully you can see the slides. Please let me know if you can't. But as Nutree said, Seth Miller-Gabriel, I am co-lead BDO USA's infrastructure and P3 group, just to to say that, but as Nutrice said, I did run the P3 office for the District of Columbia for many years, and I'm actually calling you from one of my projects right now here in North Miami, Florida. I'm in their city hall, and the new city hall is the P3 projects, and they had some meetings here, and they kindly let me use an office, so I'm in a government office. But wanted to share you some of the basics and ideas of public-private partnerships, and then some examples I'll talk through. Please interrupt me with questions. If you have questions, I'd like you to stop me. And again, I might not be able to see you, so please just unmute yourself and feel free to interrupt. Be great. So first slide, hopefully you can see that. What is a public-private partnership? Here's the textbook. It's agreement between a public owner, you, the government, and a private entity for a delivery of a particular asset. What it really is just an agreement for a government to purchase something in a different way. Instead of the traditional issuing debt or having tax revenue, paying someone to do design, paying them, going out for procurement for build, paying that construction firm, and then taking on the maintenance obligation as the owner, you have the opportunity through a P3 to find a private sector partner that can come in its purest form, the largest form, a long-term agreement for the design, build, finance, maintenance, operation of a new facility, a new asset that, if done correctly with a lot of oversight and metrics, will be maintained appropriately, built better, built to last, financed in an effective way, and then maintained appropriately so that it can go on and last longer than it would normally. This is kind of a textbook outline of what a P3 looks like. If you had to do a graphic for a public-private partnership, I do this. And as Nutrice probably heard me, in Dallas, my daughter, when she was 3, could do this design. She's now 11. She doesn't want to have anything to do with infrastructure. But at 3 years old, I made her do this, which might be child abuse in some cases. But this is what a P3 looks like. You as the owner, you're at the top. You have one contract, one agreement with a special purpose vehicle. It's the Project Co. That Project Co has been developed by a team of companies and individuals focused on just your project, just one project. That's why it exists. That Project Co is capitalized by a mixture of debt, which is private debt through banks, and equity, which is real money. And that real money generally comes from funds, investment funds, but it's in large part in the US pension funds. So public pension funds, private pension funds, a lot of Canadian pension funds. The Canadians invest in this heavily. Continental European pension funds, Australian pension funds, very interested in investing in infrastructure projects in the United States because they are long-term and stable. They don't get the kind of returns you get in real estate investment. This tends to be low double-digit kind of returns, but it can go on for 30 or 40 years in the case of social infrastructure building, or I've worked on toll roads that actually have an 80+ year term. And so if you're investing in that money, you're going to get a return for 80 years. And if you're a fund manager, that's a pretty good deal. That SPV, that Project Co, has agreements for the design, the construction, and the long-term operation and maintenance of your asset. You as the owner always own it. They, though, the Project Co, are managing all that for you. So you don't need to figure out, well, do I need a design firm? Who's going to maintain the building? That is the responsibility of the Project Co. In an availability payment model, the government owner, you, make a regular payment to the project company, the SPV, if that building, if that asset, so it's a childcare center, a school, government office building, if it is available to you as dictated in the contract. So you say, we want this building to operate this hours, we want this quality of lighting, we want the temperature to be 72 degrees all the time in every room. That is what they have to do. If they fail to do that, then you can deduct from there. Yes, Nutrice, thank you. Thank you for sending the slide. Yes, these slides are available. And I did my best. I'm not a graphic designer. I tried to get your graphic on top so you have it. But yeah, if you can make them look better, please do so. So that's the relationship. It's one relationship between you, the owner, and their project company, meaning if something goes wrong, you know exactly who to call. If something goes wrong, you're not trying to figure out from the many, I've seen this sometimes dozens of contracts that a government building facility manager will have to figure out who they need to call. It's one phone call, something will get fixed. When you're looking at a P3, there's different delivery models. So in the P3 business, we exist in the lighter blue arrows in here. The traditional way government used to do things, the design, bid, build, that's on the left-hand side of this. And then there's the privatization on the other side. I'm not in the business of privatization, selling assets. I've always kind of operated in between there, where the public sector is transferring a certain amount of risk and responsibility to the private sector in return for the private sector delivering that asset in a different way, maybe a more efficient way. It's Gary, sorry, it's a little small, that text in there, but when you get the slides, you'll see it. It just has different degrees of transfer of risk up to the full design, build, finance, operate, maintain. You can have a P3 that exists on that spectrum. So you might want a P3 where you're just doing a design build with some finance. You could have public finances. You could have a design build with operation and maintenance. But really, especially for buildings, where we're going as an industry is that full design, build, finance, operate, maintain to drive the most value for the public with the most responsibility transferred to the private sector, letting them maintain that building. So what is a P3? What it's not, I always start with what's not, is not privatization. If you're, it's okay if you have some real estate component of a deal to bring in some capital if needed, that's fine. But that asset is always retained. The main asset, the focus of the project has to be owned by the public. You're not selling here in North Miami. We're not selling the city hall and then leasing it back. No, it is a contract. That's all the public sector, the private sector has is the contract. It is not a grant program. This is not the private sector coming in and making grants, not charity. It shouldn't be the government making grants to the private sector. It is a contractual relationship with performance measures baked in, where it is the private sector should be driven ultimately for a profit motive by delivering value, and the public sector is driven allowing and engaging the private sector to do better than it does on its own. It is not a funding solution. You might be able to get some retail in. I always joke, if you want to have a new airport, how many Starbucks can I put in that airport? How much retail? And any of you do a lot of international travel, the US is way behind on airports. If you go most European airports, to get through customs, you have to go through the duty-free shop. There's a reason for that. The money for the airport comes from that retail. Airports are just shopping malls where you trap people for a few hours. That's how they pay for themselves. And the US, we kind of underinvested in our airports, and we haven't capitalized on that revenue that comes in to pay for it. Some funding can come from that, but really, I always have to disappoint public sector folks and like, oh, we have this great idea, we have no money, we'll do a P3. That's not how it works. You still have to have the funding. It is just a financing mechanism, not funding, and it is not the right solution for everything. I've estimated, maybe 15% at best projects in the United States or really around the world can be delivered as a public-private partnership. Vast majority of our infrastructure projects still have to be delivered under more traditional public means. It's just how it is. It doesn't work for everything. Let me advance my slides here. So what is a P3? So it is a design construction, as I said, mechanism to engage the private sector in that long-term contractual relationship. It's a risk-sharing approach. Instead of government taking on all the risk, you are, through the contract, transferring some of that risk to the private sector. Caution you, make sure you only transfer the risk that A, you can afford to transfer, because there is a cost of that, and B, only transfer the risks that the private sector are better able to maintain and mitigate. If there are some risks that the government can manage better, keep those risks. It's trying to balance that risk with the cost. It's a life cycle procurement approach. So instead of just looking at the sticker price, which we all do, it's just human nature. Can I afford that new car? Yes, I can. Am I thinking about, can I afford to maintain that new car? Heck, not. I'm not thinking about it. Well, I do, because I do, but most people are not thinking about it. And if you buy a fancy car, the maintenance of that car could be very expensive. And that's something you should factor in. The P3 forces everyone involved to look at the full life cycle cost. So just saying, okay, our capital cost for design and construction of the building is going to be X, $10 million, small building. It forces everyone involved to say, all right, your capital cost for design and construction might be X, but then we have to factor in the financing costs, and then we have to factor in the operation and maintenance costs for 30 years to come up with that availability payment. So it pushes government to say, oh, my $10 million building is actually going to cost me $2 million a year, every year for 30 years, because I actually have to budget for the maintenance of it, because I now, government, have obligated myself to the maintenance of that building, which is really what we should be doing in the public sector, because let's be honest, sometimes we build fancy buildings and then we don't maintain them, and they become very expensive and they fail to achieve the objectives of value to the residents. And then sometimes they just kind of fall apart, and that doesn't help anybody. We're in that cycle. We got to break this cycle of new buildings and poor maintenance. I'd rather have older buildings that have been maintained appropriately, because you're driving more value for the taxpayers and for the end user. And the idea that we're building fancy new schools, the kids go to those schools, and in 5 years, there's no heating and cooling the schools because no one's figured out how to change the HVAC system filters. This is a real example. That doesn't serve those children in those schools, nor is it good value. And it's a transparent relationship. We get the questions a lot of, well, will I be able to see the books of the private sector? Will I know how much money they're making? Yes, you will. This is the kind of the relationship where the private sector has to be fully transparent. So does the public sector. You need to have that relationship, that communication to make this work. So this slide just looks at the difference between funding and financing. And please don't take this as an offense, but when you get into these projects, there's always this confusion of, wait, is it funding? Is it financing? Funding is the real money. And let's be honest, the money really only comes from the public sector. It's either going to come from you, from tax revenue or fee revenue, or the end user purchasing something. So it could be general revenue, taxes. If you get grants from the federal government, great, that lowers your cost of capital. Use them. If you get other grant money that can come in, great, use it for capital costs, lower the cost of money, fantastic. If the project can kick off money, like I said with the airports, if you can sell more Starbucks and get people to shop in duty free, good. If you can get revenue within a building or anything else, or like a toll road, please do it. But that's funding. It's not financing. On the financing side, this is where the P3 exists. It's debt. So you can have some bank loans, private placements. It's that equity investment. Remember, it's those pension funds coming and investing, or it could be some debt through the federal government. The federal government, especially in transport, is very keen on more P3s. And if you look at the infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act, there's a big push, a big focus on public-private partnerships. So programs like TIFIA, which is the transportation, WIFIA, which is for water. There's now SIFIA, which is for carbon. Private activity bonds, which every state has an allocation of it. It is bonds specifically for P3s, private activity going on in partnership with the public sector that allows essentially the private sector to utilize debt at the treasury rate. It's an amazing tool, especially in a climate where higher interest rates and other credit enhancement projects or programs that are out there. Those credit enhancements exist in the Department of Education, Department of Energy, EPA, all have these programs. So projects you're looking at, if you engage with a private partner, actually open up a whole new world of financing options besides the general obligation or revenue bonds that you might be used to. When you're talking about P3s, you're talking about all value for money. That's why you do it. Again, it's not free money. It's not a grant program. It's just a different way of the government purchasing something, whether it's a school or a road. And you're doing that because you want better value for money. It is not lowest cost. So you get in the mindset, oh, we're going to go with the bidder, it's the lower cost. You want to go for the bidder that gives you the most for your money. So if it's the same amount of money and you get more, great. If you get a lot more and it's a little more money, if you can afford it, do it. Figure out how to do it because you're going to get more value out of it. The graphic we have here shows you just an example of why your P3s can be better value for money. It's not changing, you still have the same cost, you can drive some value. It's a lot of that risk transfer. So instead of that retained risk that the government holds on to that sometimes we don't account for very well in government, you've transferred those risks, including some insurance risk, cost overrun risk, delay risk over to the private sector. That becomes their responsibility. Them taking on that risk lowers your cost over the life of the project, meaning that if that building, I know there's a big focus on childcare centers, the building in which that service is being provided, if that building is maintained appropriately over a 30-year term, your cost of owning that building, because you are the owner of that building, goes down. And there's no surprises in the budget. When I worked for DC government, we always had terrible things, terrible example of the DC jail, which is in the news every once in a while. I toured it, I was there once. I toured it as a government official. I was not in jail for any reason, but it was in really bad shape. And the air conditioning broke in the jail. Very old building, very little airflow. And in DC, the summers get very hot. We couldn't have people in that jail without air conditioning. The easiest, quickest, only fix for temporary air conditioning was bring in mobile units with big pipes that went in and airflow that came out. Those mobile units cost $20 million. If the building had been maintained appropriately and the HVAC systems had been maintained over a course of 20 or 30 years, that $20 million would not have been spent emergency air conditioning for a jail, which was, I assure you, the last thing that the DC government wanted to spend $20 million on. But it's those kind of surprises, those unbudgeted surprises when a building is not maintained, because buildings get deferred maintenance. Like, oh, we'll fix the HVAC next year. Oh, we'll do it next year. We'll do it. There's no money until it breaks. And now you're up at $20 million to fix it. So just an example. So moving on to the slides. Get my slides to advance. So a note on bundling projects. I know talking to you, Therese, this happened. We get a lot of questions. Is there a project that's too small? When I started out with P3s, I'll say 20 years ago, I started when I was 5 years old doing public-private partnerships. There was always this, oh no, you couldn't touch a project for less than $150 million. Then it got down to $100 million, then 50. Now there's really no floor for how small a project can be that will attract private equity. Sometimes you get a very small project on its own. Sometimes if you can bundle several small projects together, you hit an economy of scale where there's enough interest there that you can have very competitive and robust procurement, and the private sector really does want to advance. So one example, instead of doing one school, an example that's very big right now in Prince George's County, Maryland, which is just outside of the District of Columbia, Maryland, they did a first tranche, I believe it was 6 schools, because one school by itself was not big enough, didn't have the value for money. So they put 6 of them together. Under one package, they're going to get 6 new elementary schools, all from one bidder. The reason they did 6 is because if you have 6 schools that look pretty similar, and the elementary schools, especially in the Mid-Atlantic, we want all our schools to be a red brick school building, no matter how big it is. It has to be red brick, has a certain aesthetic to it. So you can have one design, you have the one construction company. So instead of hiring 6 different companies to do the drywall, they have one, and they go and they do it all at once. Build all those schools so that you can deliver them at lower cost, finance that whole package at once, which lowers the financing costs. And then the real value of a P3 is that operation and maintenance. So you now have a 30+ year agreement for 6 elementary schools. What the private sector is going to do is, instead of having, I use the example, instead of having one person at each school who changes light bulbs, they will have one person who will change light bulbs for all 6 schools. You've now lowered your labor costs, you lower your operation costs, and you have someone who's the expert in changing all the light bulbs at the school. Just an example. They're going to do a lot more than light bulbs, but just having that kind of efficiency, taking that over 30 years, lowers your cost of ownership to the point where the higher cost of a P3 initially goes away very rapidly. Your better maintenance lowers your cost of ownership. And that idea of now I've bundled all these schools together, hit that economy scale, it's been so successful. Prince George's County has gone to a second tranche of schools. I think it's 8 schools, including middle schools now, and go on. They have actually made an agreement with the state of Maryland where the state of Maryland came into some money. They handed out money to the other counties in the state for school construction. Prince George's County actually made a deal where the state of Maryland will be giving that money over 30 years to pay for part of the availability payment of these public-private partnerships. That's how committed they are. That's how successful it's been through the bundling of these projects. So that's one example of schools. My favorite project, because it was when I started my second child, was the DC street lighting project. It doesn't sound that interesting, but we in the process of changing all the overhead lighting on the streets to LED lights. I love LED lights. They use half the energy. Their carbon footprint is very, very low compared to traditional halogen lights. And the cost of it, the way they're doing that in DC is that they are putting, have a group coming in. They're going to design a new lighting system. They're going to build out that new lighting system. They're going to finance the lighting system, and they're going to take on the operation and maintenance of that lighting system, I believe, for 15 years. Meaning if a light goes out, the district is not going to pay for that light. The private sector is on the hook for that. So it's lighting as a service. The idea of just changing light bulbs, that is, we bundled 75,000 light bulbs essentially all together in one project until it came out to be about $200 million. It's those kind of things at P3, you find the right partner, you drive that efficiency, and that's really the heart of what a public-private partnership is. I'll stop these slides so I can see all of you on my screen here again at once, and happy to take any questions. Look like Simon, you have your hand up.
Yeah, in the context of the schools that you used as a reference, I mean, I see the bundle and the opportunities for economies of scale, but how was that a P3 rather than just traditional financing?
So the school, so Prince George's County Schools went out to the market and said, we want to find a team that will design these schools, build them, privately finance them, and then operate them, the maintenance of them, not the school. We're not privatizing the school. The education is delivered by the public school system. It's just the building that's still owned by the school system, but has been designed, built, financed, and is being maintained, will be maintained by the private partner. The money coming from the state goes to paying the availability payment, the annual payment if the building's available.
I'm still struggling with the difference between what they just went through traditional bond financing and contracting that out.
Yeah.
And yes, they're not, they've essentially contracted out the maintenance rather than doing it in-house, which maybe is a savings, but I'm not quite sure how that's outside of the traditional system of and any different than what we would see in a P3, where there's a funding mechanism or another revenue source that could offset the costs to the taxpayer or to the district.
So yes, for the school district in a traditional P3, exactly what you said. So they would, the county would issue bonds. They would take that money, they'd go hire a design firm for 1 or 6 schools, how many schools they'd have. They'd pay that design firm. They'd take that design to a construction company, contract with them for how many number of schools to build it. Inevitably, there's some disagreement between the design and the construction, and the designers are not there anymore. So you start to get in a situation where you have change orders, delays, and the costs go up.
So I understand that piece of the efficiencies of doing it with a singular project. I'm just not seeing how that itself is outside of the bundling, because bundling does not equal P3.
Well, but bundling helps to get to maximize the efficiency of the P3, because you're building one school multiple times, and you have one partner for that whole network, the whole bundle of schools. So the cost for that partner per school unit goes down, meaning the total cost of the whole program goes down for the public sector.
Why is it not then a P2? You know what I mean? Like it's just a larger, more unified private partner that is still going through traditional funding mechanism through the bonding process, as I understand it. So I'm
no. So under this, there's no bonds. The county, the school district, which is this one and the same in Maryland, didn't issue bonds for this project. So they will have, however they generate the revenue, the funding for it. The funding goes into the availability payment, and that availability payment has performance metrics attached. So if the schools are not performing, the private sector is not performing, that availability payment could be delayed or could have deductions. So the private sector is motivated to make sure the schools are available and maintained, opened, everything is working the way it should, or they don't get paid. Under the traditional means, if your school is not open, say all the bathrooms on one floor don't work, there is no deduction of payment. You can't say, I'm not going to pay the full bonds back this month because the school was not available to me. The public sector still, you have to pay the bondholders if you issue general obligation bonds, no matter what. If the building burns down, you still have to pay the bondholders. Under the P3, if the building is not available, not functioning as it should under the term of the contract, you as the public owner have the ability not to make that payment to your private partner. So the private partner must perform to receive the full payment.
But that's purely contractual.
Well, a P3 is a contractual agreement between the owner, you, and the private party, the team.
Yeah, I guess what I'm missing, and this is maybe just my failure, is there's always that, like, in my mind, there's always the fee structure or the other revenue source where you're actually offsetting the full cost to the taxpayer. And I mean, I guess it's a little bit of a different piece. I mean, and again, that's incorporated into the contract, but here, what I'm seeing is just in the school example, is a modification of a contract so that you can increase efficiencies and reduce risk on the school district or in the public entity, but there's not a new revenue source for the public.
That's correct. So in a very standard, kind of the plain vanilla availability payment P3, you are correct. All the money comes from where it would come from traditionally, where government. It is just to drive efficiency and to get better outcomes. If you have a different kind of asset, say a toll road or a transit system, then you have new revenue sources that are coming up. Or my airport example, you'd have new revenue sources. So there's availability payment and there's revenue P3s, and there's a blending of those two in between.
Yeah, and I guess that's a question for us, Natrice, is what are we looking for in our context? And so you know, and I guess I'm gonna have to run here in a second, but I, you know, relative to our statute and our guiding documents, like what are we trying to achieve? You know, which is what we've talked about, which is a little bit of like, oh, it just feels more like a grant or more like a, you know, this kind of project, whereas like we're, you know, I won't belabor it, but just kind of where should we be sitting relative in this spectrum?
Agree. I think one of the things that we've looked at is, you know, the revenue generation is going to be a key component for us because we are looking at a potential self-funded model, especially if Senate Bill 1 passes, that we will have to generate that revenue from these projects in order for us to continue to do projects. Otherwise, we end up running out of money. So that's one thing we do have to consider. Carrie, and then we do have our next presentation who's joined, who's on a time constraint too. So we can always bring Seth back as well if we have more questions. Go ahead, Carrie.
Anytime. Carrie, you're on mute.
I think my question is further along what Simon was raising, but I was trying to understand your slide that was funding versus financing. And I think it may go to the two different types of P3s you were describing that, you know, just in the broad sense that some are just about creating an asset for the state to make sure it's available, that might not be that is not a revenue generating activity like an elementary school, versus a revenue generating activity like providing broadband, which is in our kind of list of targets. And so when in your chart, you had funding versus financing, and under funding, there was no expectation of a return on investment by the state. So I assume that that's in the context of of this availability model where the state needs the school, they know they're going to have to pay to have the school, instead of building it themselves, paying for all of that up front, they do a P3, and then they're paying for the access to, you know, they're paying for the making sure that school is available and operating and maintained, as opposed to dealing with funding through bonds. But what we're looking at, I think all of the targets we're looking at are not that. We're not saying the states, and correct me if I'm wrong, Natrice, but that we're not building an early childhood education center, for example, that the state's going to own and operate and need to have available. So so when you look at, if we're being asked to provide money, not just make available property, but we're being asked by these applicants to make financial investments, how does that work in the context of a P3? Because we're effectively being asked to contribute equity with no return. And so are there debt structures that states can use? Like what can you, I'd like to understand more about that.
Yeah, and I don't want to overrun the time, but yeah, the short answer is yes. There's many ways of financing this, and it can be a mixture of public and private money. And when you're looking at the child care centers, I would encourage you to look at, what are you asking me to, are you being asked to provide the building, the shell, or the services inside? And if it's the building, you can structure a P3 that does have public and private money involved. The private money, if you're being asked to put public money in, does that lower the cost of capital? Like, can you buy down essentially some of the capital expense so that the availability payment, that upkeep that you're doing so the building's available might be lower going forward? It's all, you know, what are you looking for? It comes down to the down payment versus the monthly payment essentially on it. So thinking about the building, you know, how much can you put down? What do you want to pay? And then if you're going to own the building so the services can exist within that facility, who's going to maintain it? Who's going to take on the risk? The best example I have to think, I should have started with this, for a building availability payment, think of it as your home mortgage, except that mortgage includes all the maintenance of your house included in it. So your monthly mortgage payment is all inclusive of everything of the house that's available to you. If you're going to be in a position to own that facility, a state facility, so that services can happen in it, you want to take that idea. If it's a different mechanism where someone else is going to own the building, you're really kind of in an oversight capacity. And if it's a land, you know, you have the land and the building, so it's really an oversight to make sure that facility is operating the way it should. I would encourage you, if you as the state have made an investment in it, then you might want to start thinking as an investor. So your return might not be financial, but your return should be in services. What's the public good coming out of that? But in that case, it's less of a P3, I was like, quote unquote, and I hate defining P3 because and more of a state funding and financing program, which is okay, but that's a different thing than a P3.
Thanks, Seth. I think what we'll do is probably bring you back also to have a more in-depth discussion about this. Because I do want to have our next presenter come up. But thank you for your time. I will share the slides with everyone, and then I'll get with you to bring you back for maybe our April meeting so we can designate more time so that everybody can ask more questions, and then also go into more detail about some of the types of projects that we're receiving so we can give you examples and not just give you 30 minutes to talk about it. But thank you.
No worries. Happy to help. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks. Bye. All right, Zach and team. So you all received a proposal for Auraria Higher Education Campus, which in short is AHEC, for those of you who don't know. I will go ahead. There's a presentation that Zach and his team have in regard to this particular project submission. I will run the slides so they can talk. So just Zach, tell me when you want next slide and I will make sure I take care of that for you.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Natrice. Thank you so much. And thank you and to all the members of the committee here for the time and allowing us to come in here and talk about this transformational project. So before I dive into it, I am Zach Hermson. I'm the Chief Financial Officer for the Auraria Higher Education Center, or AHEC, as we will lovingly call it from here on forward. And I'm joined here by my colleagues. Maybe I'll pass it to Yvonne to let him introduce himself, and then Santosh and Amy as well.
Yep. Hi, everybody. Thank you for having us today. My name is Ivan Anaya, and I am the president of the Mountain West for Columbia Ventures.
And thank you all for inviting us. My name is Santosh Ramdas. I'm the interim president and CEO at Gary Community Ventures, and I'm joined by my colleague, Amy Desai.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here. I'm Amy Desai, the COO here at Gary Community Ventures.
Great. Thank you, Yvonne, Santosh, Amy, so much. So what we want to do is spend maybe 10 to 15 minutes giving an overview of the project, who AHEC is, Columbia Ventures, Gary Community Ventures, and then certainly allot enough time on the back end to answer Q&A for this project. So Natrice, maybe next slide, and I'll talk a little bit about who AHEC is. What we are essentially is a state entity, and we're tasked in the mid-70s to really provide shared services for the entire Auraria campus. And when I say Auraria campus, what I'm referring to is 150 acres bordered by Colfax, Spear, and Auraria Parkway, providing anything from facilities, custodial, contract management, procurement, distribution, financial services, et cetera, to the 3 higher education institutions on our campus, specifically Community College of Colorado, or Denver, Metro State University of Denver, and the University of Colorado, Denver. We have roughly 38,000 plus students on our campus at any point in time, with 5,000 faculty and staff. Across the 150 acres, we have roughly 60 plus shared buildings that at any point in time, all 3 institutions will have classes running in. We have a library, a performing arts center. We also have an early learning center that's part of this particular project, which we'll get into. It's not part of the request for funding, but it is a key component of the project itself. And we also have an Auraria campus police department with 50 plus safety officers on staff. So we are a full state enterprise providing services to the 3 institutions on this campus. Next slide, Natrice. So when we look at what the Auraria campus is all about, what we're primarily focused on is 4 quadrants. First and foremost, it's education. We were established in the mid-70s as a campus for higher education, and that is at the core of what we do and what we will do as we move forward. In addition to that, what we do is provide connections to the city, and not just connections, but innovation opportunities for workforce development and advancement. And if you think about Larimer Square right across Spear, you think about the Kroenke development, the Ball Arena redevelopment, the Mile High, the River Mile, the Sun Valley component, all of this development is happening right around the Auraria campus. And what we want to do is really execute our master plan that I'll talk about a little bit to capitalize on the assets that we have on this campus. In addition, given the fact we have over 6,500 parking spaces, we have our own police department, we have event spaces spread across the entire campus, we are focused on activation. And we've put a lot of resources in this over the past year. And this spans anywhere from hosting weddings and conferences to the picture here, the avalanche watch parties, which took place last summer with 10,000 people coming to the campus. It's a great opportunity for branding, for campus awareness, and certainly spread the word of the resources that we have. And last and certainly not least here is destination. And this is really about creating a complete neighborhood. It's part of our strategic plan. It's part of the master plan that we have in place. And certainly the master plan we're going to execute on this year is to make sure that we're creating permanent density and vibrancy and a complete neighborhood and sense of community for not just the students, faculty, and staff of the campus, but certainly permanent residents that we're looking to bring through the development that we'll talk about here today. So next slide, Patrice. In terms of the site itself, this is kind of an overview of where the campus sits in relation to downtown. So just south, you can see just to the west of us is Ball Arena, and certainly that redevelopment, which is in the works right now. The site we're referring to for this particular development, which we'll get into, is a 2-acre vacant parcel that's located just to the east of Auraria Parkway, just to the south of the Hotel Learning Center that Metro State runs, and just to the north of our Tivoli Garage. And you can see the Tivoli Quad, which is a vacant space that we use to activate events, just to the east of this site as well. So the campus is spread pretty much across 150 acres. This is on the western side of the campus. Next slide. So what is the development? I know we put this in the application. We're certainly here to talk through this in detail and answer questions that you have. But in line with AHEC's strategic plan, our master plan, certainly the one that we're looking to redevelop here this year, what we're looking at is really 2 components. One is a mixed income housing piece, which Yvonne will talk through in his slides, that also provides opportunity for faculty, staff, and alumni housing, which is a major attraction and retention tool for the institutions on our campus. In addition to the mixed income housing component, which is anywhere from 12 to 13 stories and 300 plus units, we're also looking at a separate structure that is office and commercial. And the office commercial component will include the Early Learning Center on the main floor of that, call it 25,000 square foot floor plate. Right now, the Early Learning Center sits on Colfax in a 40-plus-year-old building in a 1-story structure with deferred maintenance that continues to accrue. The idea is let's relocate them to this development, create efficiencies with space, be able to attack the 100-plus student wait list we have in that area, and then free up that 1-acre or 1-story parcel on Colfax for future redevelopment opportunity. In addition to that, we have higher education use in the middle of that, which includes CCD and MSU's Classroom to Career Hub, which is a workforce training and placement opportunity for the 2 institutions. In addition to that, AHEC is looking to centralize our administration. Right now, we're spread across multiple buildings, and we really want to have one cohesive space to operate out of. In addition to that, Gary Community Ventures is looking to relocate and have 1 floor be their new legacy home on our campus, which is incredibly exciting for us. So there are a lot of opportunities in this space, and we're still working through some potential additional opportunities to build on that stack. Right now, that commercial office building is roughly 4 stories, but certainly could go up to 6 or 7, depending on final programming. Next slide. In terms of the site itself, I've kind of talked through this on the prior slide, but you can see the 2 buildings split out here. Building 1, community impact. What we are looking at is doing a mass timber build for the commercial office build, and I'll let Yvonne certainly talk more about that if there's questions on that particular component. The mission aligned partners we talked about are MSU and CCD, AHEC, and Gary Community Ventures in that space, with the potential to add another 1 to 2 partners as we move forward. And then the housing component, 300 to 350 units, mixed income, targeting a 90% average income in line with Proposition 123. And I'll certainly let my colleagues go into that in more detail. And then what's interesting and unique about this, right, is the opportunity for faculty and staff to have affordable housing in co-location to their site of employment and create retention and attraction opportunities for the institutions. So with that, next slide, and I'll turn it over to Yvonne.
Great, thank you, Zach. As Zach mentioned, we are conceptualizing the development as a 2-building development. And so the development that you see, or the building that you see on the south side of the site, which is directly facing the Tivoli Quad, is the what today is conceptualized as a 4-story mass timber building. And then the development to the north, which is along Auraria Parkway, is conceptualized as a 12 or 13 story residential building that is planned for 340 total units currently. And so if we can move to the next slide, please. So in terms of sources and uses, I'll start on the right side of this slide. We'll start with the community and educational building, the 4-story building. We're currently confirmed for 100,000 square feet on that side. As Zach mentioned, that program has a potential to grow. There are a couple of partners that we're in communication with that would not only add to the square footage of the building, but also would add to the total impact, community impact of this project, both for the campus as well as for Denver as a whole. And so Gary Community Ventures space is really is planned for 25,000 total square feet. Their new headquarters office would be 20,000 square feet, and they'd have an event space that could be used by nonprofits for galas and large events at presumably a below market rate. And then it could also be used, by the way, by the campus community for special events. Then Auraria Higher Education Center, so AHEC would move their administrative offices into the building, and they would be at approximately 12,000 square feet. And as Zach mentioned, the Early Learning Center would be 25,000 square feet, and the Career Hub would also be 25,000 square feet. And then there's one remaining portion of the building that is yet to be identified. We've got some great leads on strong partners that would make a big difference in terms of impact to the program that would take on the last 13,000 square feet. With all that said, we're anticipating that the commercial building will cost, and this is aside from FF&E, but all in build out costs would be approximately $623 a square foot, totaling $62,300,000. On the residential side, we are planning for a 340 unit building, and the 340 unit building would, I'll talk through the unit mix here in the next slide, so I won't jump into that, but would be essentially a $130 million build out. And so that equates to approximately $380,000 per unit. From a hard construction cost perspective, that comes down to about $293,000 per unit, which is close and in line with construction costs today, considering the fact that we are on Auraria campus. The project would not include any parking. The campus has got ample parking for to be able to accommodate this project. We would, however, do a parking study to ensure that all of the needs are met, and that we're not developing a project that then would become an issue either for the residents or the users of the commercial and education building, or the rest of the campus for that matter. Next slide. Now, in regard to unit mix, this is a mixed income, middle income development. And so, at the very bottom of this table, you'll see there's the mean AMI, the mean area median income that we are setting rents at is 90% of the area median income. And so what that means is that we're essentially income averaging all of the units and allowing for some of the units, specifically for faculty, staff, and potentially alumni, to be available at the 60% AMI, at the 60% AMI level. And then we're subsidizing that with higher rent units, which would be the 120% AMI units. And so you'll see that we kind of barbell the unit mix at 19%, both for 60% AMI units as well as 120% AMI. A lot of this is due to the fact that we intend to finance this project through Prop 123 equity. And so if we could go to the next slide, I can talk a little bit more about that. So if you look at the middle of the, actually, I'm sorry, Trace, could you go back up 2 slides? It's easier if I talk through it this way, I think. There we go. So if you look at the left side of the slide, residential project sources, we've got Prop 123 debt, which would be approximately $3 million, and the interest rate on that is about 2%. And then Prop 123 equity at $10 million, so it becomes 28% of the equity. And so Prop 123 has an income average stipulation of 90% AMI, and so that's where the unit mix really is derived from, or I guess what drives the unit mix more than anything else is getting to that income average. Idris, if you wouldn't mind going back down 2 slides now. Thank you. So in regard to starting on the right side of the slide, just talking about some of the financing assumptions for the project. Construction debt on the project, we're assuming a blended cost of capital of 5.14%. As I mentioned a little bit ago, we do intend to utilize Prop 123 debt. That would be, $3 million at 2% interest rate, and so the rest of that then would just be a conventional loan for construction debt. That is currently set at 5.25%, or assumed to be 5.25%, and that's simply based on projects that Columbia Ventures is currently working on and is currently has got term sheets to finance, and so we're basing this off of information that is current and actual to us today. The next thing that I want to just point to here is we're assuming state P3 equity at $5 million, and so that is something that we'll want to talk a little bit more about what the terms of such equity would look like. I'm glad we were part of the last 3 minutes of that previous conversation, because this project, I believe, delivers exactly what the comments that were made what the comments that were made would hope for, right? So this is a project that has revenue. It would pay back it would pay back the investment, and it also has a lot of community impact. And so we will definitely want to chat a little bit further about what those terms would look like, and happy to answer any other questions that you may have in regard to the impact that a project like this would bring. There's a lot of information on this slide. Happy to come back to it during the question and answer session, but for the sake of time, we'll keep moving and move on to the next slide.
Yeah, thanks, Yvonne. Let me talk about campus benefits briefly here, and then I'll pass it over to Santosh and Amy to go through some slides on Gary Community Ventures. We've hit on some of these things, and this is information that we've shown the 3 institutions, we've shown our board. To say there's a ton of excitement about this opportunity is a massive understatement. I think everyone realizes the fact that we have 150 acres of state-owned land. We have a massive opportunity for future developments and to create that permanent density and a complete neighborhood and community here for students, faculty, staff, but also the Denver community. So we've chunked this out more for our internal ABOD board, just to get comfortable with, but I'll highlight some of the points, right? First and foremost, on the top left, this really is the tip of the spear. And what we mean is this is our opportunity to start with a project like this and really go vertical and hit on some really key criteria as it relates to the governor's agenda. And that is affordable housing, and that is opportunities for early childhood. And that's what we mean by tip of the spear, is we can do this here, and then we can replicate this model across other development opportunities on this campus. It definitely looks at maximizing the use and getting away from the 1, 2, 3-story builds that have historically been done on this campus and trying to maximize the parcels that we have. It is an opportunity to drive market rate ground lease back into AHEC and help diversify our revenue sources as we look to go forward. We know what the trend is with higher ed enrollments and state funding in Colorado, so we're maniacally focused on trying to drive auxiliary revenue sources in. Yvonne touched on this, but we do have a parking enterprise. We do have 6,500 spaces on campus split across 14 different surface lots and 3 garages, including the Tivoli garage, which is just to the south of this proposed development that offers right around 855 parking spaces. In addition to that, there's the 7th Street garage, which is a 2 to 3 minute walk, which is another 1,800 parking spaces on top of that. And so the opportunity for us to kind of co-locate it in one space is massive. In terms of campus potential opportunity, certainly, having an opportunity to have everyone in one vertical stack and focus on mental health and ECE and teacher training and workforce developments, and the potential to have faculty, staff, alumni, student housing in one structure and kind of have this be the first of many that we'd like to do on this campus is massively exciting. And then certainly the opportunity for mixed use retail, there is the plan to go do retail and certainly look at incubation and innovation opportunities in that retail space, and potentially even give priority to alumni or current students, through programmatic opportunities and internship opportunities. So I just want to hit on those things, and certainly, again, happy to answer any Q&A, but let me pass it over to Santosh and Amy right now.
Thanks, Zach. I'm going to just give you all a quick overview of Gary Community as a starting place, and then end with just a little bit of context on our participation in this development and what Gary is bringing to the table and why we're excited about this partnership. I'm going to talk mostly, but I'll ask Amy to jump in if she has anything else to add, and she's going to probably jump in if y'all have more questions too. Just quickly about Gary, we've been a long-standing Denver institution, formerly known as Beaton Foundation, started by Sam Gary, and in 2012 we evolved as Gary Community Ventures. We were called Gary Community Investments, and recently rebranded as Gary Community Ventures. I just want to touch on 3 distinct things that makes us unique and why we're particularly excited about this opportunity, as well as the opportunity to work with the P3 subcommittee and the P3 office. The first is that we go away in 2035. So Sam set us up in a way where he saw the need for a philanthropic entity to really be a partner for the public sector and for the nonprofit sector and business to really move the needle on things that are innovative and significantly higher risk, which means that we exist not because we want to be perpetual, we exist because we want to take risk and fail, and it's okay on behalf of communities we serve. Which also means that we sunset in 2035. So we typically see ourselves as a bolder, more courageous actor in this space, and we're excited for things that are moving the needle, and including this development that we're working with AHEC and Columbia Ventures. Latrice, if you don't mind moving to the next slide. The second thing that I think we love about Gary, and which I think is fairly unique and really aligned with the way you all think about things, is we call ourselves a Swiss Army knife. So we're set up to do essentially pretty much anything under the toolkits that we have in order to go after a significant issue that we see, whether it's early childhood, whether it's affordable housing, whether it's mental health. We're able to use grants. We're able to do for-profit mission investments. We do policy. We can do campaigns, and we're able to do pilot new ventures and startups and ideas and funds. And we have dedicated teams that do all of this. So we have investment bankers sitting side by side with community organizers, with grant makers, looking at the world with the way communities look at the world, because communities don't see these as separate tools. They experience the world as one single thing, which is why I think the P3 office is also powerful, because leveraging the power of business and policy and nonprofits and ventures together is really how we think about big problems. And it's one of the most unique things about the way Gary is set up. If you don't move to the next slide. Here's a quick snapshot of how this comes to life. Here are some examples of work across grants, mission investments, policies change, and new ventures. And I think the one example that I would actually take forward is really thinking about housing, which is an area we've been spending a lot of time on lately. On the grant side, it's not listed here, but we've been doing grant making in housing for about the last 30 years, including creating new entities, as well as supporting existing organizations that have been doing housing work. And obviously, we've also been starting up new housing organizations. Urban Land Conservancy was incubated at Gary about 20 years ago. More recently, we supported the creation of the Elevation Community Land Trust. And obviously, the most recent one we've done is the Deerfield Fund for Black Wealth, which is focused on Black home ownership. And what we did was to say, and then meantime, we also did a whole bunch of for-profit investments in housing. We've been LPs in housing developments. We've invested in housing funds. We've looked at home ownership funds. So we kind of came with a lot of history on that. And we knew across the board that the solutions were there that can solve the affordable housing crisis. But what we needed really was a larger public dollar and public spending around focused on affordable housing. So we took all those lessons, built a campaign around it, and then helped put in place what we think is a pretty game-changing piece of policy measure, which is Proposition 123, which passed by voters last year. And so you could see how systemically you could start using these tools. And when you start using them collectively, you can, start really moving the needle on addressing some of the harder challenges that our state faces. And I think that we've done this in housing. Obviously, we've done this in the ECE space too, including helping Proposition EE. But we kind of pride ourselves in being able to do that. And I like that moment because I like that, I think, very closely aligned with how the P3 office thinks about your work and trying to bring assets and tools together to work in service of Coloradans. And then, Teresa, if you don't mind, the last slide. So that brings us to this moment where about a year ago, or 6 months ago, time's hazy, our board got excited about us kind of building a permanent space for Gary that we can kind of invest in terms of an office space. And our lease is expiring sometime during the next year. And so that's how this conversation started. And we wanted to do something which is Gary-like, which is not just to go buy a building and then, put an office space in there, but when we say, how do we coalesce community around it? How do we bring the right set of actors together? And we were incredibly lucky to meet, obviously, the AHEC team as well as Columbia Ventures team. And so we're committing up to $15 million right now, primarily for the commercial space as capital that we're bringing into the deal. And we're really excited that we're then able to create not just our office space, but an early childhood center, which was closely related with the work. We're creating the campus space for thinking about career readiness for young people, which is also an incredibly important thing. And then we're doing housing side by side, almost living into our own values of thinking about Prop 123 and how do we unlock that to do middle income / workforce housing there, right? So we're living into that. And so our participation is not just that capital, but being a thought partner in all this. That being said, we're also thinking of coming into the equity stack within the affordable housing development so that when Yvonne and the Columbia Ventures team is trying to go out and raise equity, including from you all, we're also stepping up as a partner, not just on the commercial side, but also on the affordable housing side. And that is something we're in early conversations on. I'll pause there. That's broadly the overview, and happy to answer any questions specifically with Gary or engagement in this project in particular.
If you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, Natrice. Great, thanks, Santosh. And I'll be brief, tell you a little bit about Columbia Ventures, the development partner on this project. So Columbia Ventures is a Black-founded organization out of Atlanta, Georgia. It was formed the Columbia companies were formed in 1991 by a gentleman who grew up in affordable housing. He actually, his first mission and vision for the company was to build cathedrals for God's children. And so he's really delivered on that and in a multitude of different ways. But essentially Columbia Ventures is an organization that focuses on master development, mixed use work. There are typically 3 things that we ensure every one of our projects includes. One of those is strong community impact, so it's not just about profit. 2 is service enriched housing, and so when we build housing, we also want to ensure that there are community specific services related to the project and specifically located within the project. And so this project, I think is in many ways the epitome of everything that Columbia Ventures wants to see in a project. And so and the last thing, the third thing is upward mobility, right? And it's not just upward income mobility for our residents and campus tenants, but in regard to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I think we want to be able to provide the opportunities for folks to self-actualize in whatever way they need to and whatever that means to them. And so we build the hardware, and it's important to us that we partner with folks like AHEC and Gary Community Ventures for good software, because at the end of the day, that's really what makes the project special is the programming. And so we're excited to be a part of this project. I'll tell you a little bit about what's on this slide. Columbia Ventures, or the Columbia companies, in the last 30 years have developed over 11,500 residential units. 10,500 of those are affordable and mixed income units in over 80 individual projects. We have a property management staff of 300 folks, and 7 of those folks are actually our compliance team, and so that's important to us, specifically when we're talking about P3. We're talking about Prop 123. We'll likely have a community benefit agreement or something along those lines with the partners that will be on site, and so having a good compliance team is critically important to us, and so they're a great resource, and I'm happy to be a part of a company that has one. As far as our development experience goes, as I mentioned earlier, we specifically focus on master developments. We mostly work within the urban environment and have got urban higher education development experience. But really what we do well is incorporate housing in community impact developments. And so that's what we're talking about today. So I'll go ahead and stop there. And I think that's the last slide. Is that right, Zach?
I think there was one on income rent tables, Siobhan. That was the last one.
Yeah, that's for reference in case there were any questions regarding the unit mix.
Yep, I appreciate that. Yeah, thank you, Yvonne, Santosh, Amy, certainly. So, Natrice, I guess with that's kind of the presentation we wanted to run through to supplement the application that we sent in. I would love to use as much time as we have here to answer any questions the team has.
Thank you all. Commissioners, does anyone have any questions regarding the project or the presentation?
I've got some, Natrice. I'm not sure if I want to go first, but I will. Unless, Carrie, do you have any? I would defer to you, of course.
No, don't defer to me. I do have some, but I was hoping someone else would go first this time.
Okay. Well, thanks for the presentation. If we go back to the sources and uses page, one of the questions I have probably deals with this in particular. So we're on your team here, guys. We're just asking these questions because we have to protect the public, the public interest and clarify stuff. So it comes from a good place. So the perception could be that the contingency is too low and the developer fees are too high. So prove me wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start by saying that first on the housing development, it's $130 million development. Columbia Ventures has the balance sheet and the wherewithal to sign all of the guarantees on that development, and so we're taking all of the risk on this deal. So from completion guarantee all the way through any type of recapture guarantee, depending on the types of sources that are coming in. A 6% developer fee based on the type of returns that we will earn on a development like this is not necessarily outsized compared to the fact that on similar projects like a LIHTC project, we're allowed up to a 12% developer fee for projects that have more than 51 units, and so we're actually seeking a 6% developer fee and not something like a 12% developer fee. And so. In terms of contingency, could you just tell me a little bit more about that part of your question?
Do you think 5% is enough?
I do, yes. And so the reason for that is that's very typical. 5% is typical for all of our projects. We in the last 6 years have developed 11 projects, and none of them have had cost overruns. Now, when we've had cost increases and the pro forma has then been adjusted, during COVID and with some of the construction cost increases that we've seen recently, we have been able to deliver each of our projects and stabilize them and continue to meet the metrics that we set out for each one of them. So a 5% contingency feels healthy. If this was an adaptive reuse project, I would feel very differently about that. But given that it's a ground up development, we really do hold we have a lot more control over what the costs look like.
Okay, and then just a couple more. I think that was a good answer. Do we know with Prop 123 if developer fees are going to be limited, because Chaff is administering it.
Santosh might be a better resource on that question, but I don't know if you have the answer to that, Santosh.
Yeah, David, the programmatic elements of that is still being developed. The measure itself doesn't really cap developer fees in a certain kind of way. So OEDIT is right now in the process of contracting with Jaffa. And I know that at this point, they're trying to be responsive in order to spur new development, but I can't answer it. I saw Jeff came off of, I don't know, Jeff, if that's been a conversation that you all have been having.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question from a Prop 123 perspective. And OEDIT is contracting with Chaffa and is going to leverage Chaffa's market expertise. And I know, we're thinking depending on how the 123 funds, for example, work with different types of capital structures, we could, for some of those things, potentially default to like existing market norms or even federal rules, if it was a federal funding structure that was used. But like the intent is to leverage Chaffa's knowledge and ensure that developer fees are appropriate with the market and not unduly large. So it's a great question. It probably depends on the full extent of all the different capital stack structures used, but we would absolutely agree that it should be in line with sort of normal market terms for similar types of funding. I know that's pretty non-committal, but I personally am not an expert on these fees, so that's one of the reasons why what it would contract with Chaffa to make sure the fees are reasonable and appropriate.
Yeah, and that's all I'm after, guys. I'm not after the fees, right? I'm after just how did you get to them? What was your thought process? Are they in line with the market? And I wanted to hear your answer. So, and then one more question, I'll turn it back over to Carrie. On the sources and uses, that Prop 123 equity at 10 million, can you explain that equity? Is that equity preferred equity? Is that equity regular equity? Do you not know? What are the terms of that of your equity? If you know, can you just walk us through that?
Yeah, I think in a similar fashion to what Jeff just said, and Santosh, the program's still being developed, and so at this moment we are making assumptions on what the equity will look like. We assume that the equity will have a pref return, and it will likely cap out somewhere around 4 or 5%. And then in terms of other terms for the equity, I mean, Santosh or Jeff, if you guys have got more details on that, but again, I know it's under development at the moment.
Yeah, I think the only thing I can speak to, David, is what's written in the measure, which is to say that a significant chunk of the funds that are being deployed through OADIT and Chaffa would be used for the concessionary equity program, and that would be provided at a level which the equity returns are significantly lower market returns. So I don't think the word significantly lower is used in the measure, so I should be careful. I think it's lower than market returns. So essentially, I think what Yvonne has done in this case is modeled a 4 to 5% pref on this equity stack as a way of thinking through how the program is going to be eventually modeled. And I do want to lean in to say, one of the design principles behind 123 as proponents, as campaigners behind that, was to say really the public-private partnership part of it. We thought that the affordable housing challenge cannot be solved by purely public dollars. We have to find the right way to coalesce private dollars to come in and act conjunction with public dollars. And so that's the design of having an equity participation in a deal, which is not a light tech equity deal. But how do you find that middle ground between light tech equity and market rate equity and find that bridge in between? And that's what this is meant to do. That being said, I just want to be fully honest saying this would be one of the first projects that's going to knock on the doors of Chaffa to say, hey, would you guys consider this? So we are, again, living into the role of being pioneers a little bit in this one.
I appreciate the answer. I'm trying to give Natrice my feedback after this, and that preferred return rate is going to affect some of the, the numbers on how we determine what the remuneration to the state's going to be if we become an equity partner, right? That's what I'm asking these for. I'm not doing it because there's a right or wrong answer or there's a right or wrong number. I'm just trying to figure out, if we invest, what's the remuneration and where are there levers to pull, right, for the state. So thank you. That was all I had.
Thanks, David.
Thanks.
Carrie?
I don't want to step on Stephen either. So Stephen, did you want to go next?
I am good. David had the same question I did on the developer fee. So I'm glad he went first, so then I don't have to be the bad guy.
I think I saw in the presentation that Columbia Ventures would own the building. Is that right?
That is correct.
So I guess I'm, given what we just learned, that doesn't seem like it's a P3 then to me. I mean, clearly AHEC is a state organization, the Prop 123, our money, we're all state monies. And I think what we're asking is to look for partners to help us build facility that we think is important to us, but we're not going to own it. And I thought that's sort of part of the cornerstone of really calling this a P3. Otherwise, it sort of looks like we're helping to provide funding to a private entity that's going to build something and benefit from it.
Yeah, so I'll go back to again the 129 million that we will sign the guarantees on, right? That's the first thing. Is Columbia Ventures is taking a lot of risk on a project like this, especially when we're capped on the revenues that we can take based on a 90% AMI income average, and so. That's one part. The second part is that because this is on the AHEC campus, we're not buying the land, we're actually ground leasing it. And so at the end of the ground lease, there is reversion of ownership to AHEC or whoever AHEC designates, or if they decide to, sell the interest in the improvement, whatever it might be, right? So on the outset, that's correct. We take the risk, and there is some return to us for that risk, and we not only own but operate the building. And so there's also a question there of whether AHEC or the state would want to be landlords, right? And so I know that's obviously a question that would have to be asked as well if we're talking about ownership.
So I'm not totally clear. I understand the ground lease. Are you saying that so you're going to own the improvement on the land and you're going to lease the land?
That's correct.
And then at the end of the ground lease, what's the term of the ground lease?
So we're looking at it's being negotiated, but it's looking like a 99-year ground lease.
So at the end of 99 years, we get the land back, but does that mean you're saying you also give us the building?
Correct. There's reversion of the ownership of the improvements to the landowner.
Okay.
That is right. Yeah.
So AHEC is the state entity, owns the land and will own the land through the entire term of the lease itself. And then per Yvonne's point, and we're still negotiating final terms, Gary, but that reversion is certainly part of it back to AHEC and the state.
So like 100 years from now, when we're not even memories anymore, this could come back to the state. But in the meantime, really, we've helped finance Columbia building a building that they're going to have a return on. And I hear that you're taking a lot of risk. I get it. But whether you built it in this context or you built it in another outside of a P3, I'm just wanting to make sure this truly is a P3.
Yeah, Gary, if I can just jump in, maybe there's a bit of a clarity here. One, on the commercial side of the building, the partners own the building. Columbia doesn't own it. So
no, I'm talking about the one we're financing, which is just the housing side.
On the residential side, Yvonne, correct me, it's a LP-GP structure where as limited partners, equity holders, we actually own the building. Isn't that right?
That's correct. Yes, that's correct. You are an owner in the building as an investor.
So if Gary puts in $5 million, let's say, and we're like, taking 10% of the equity stack, then we own 10% of the building, right?
That's right. Yes. And yeah, that's right.
And so
yeah, sorry. Is the ground lease for value, or is this like a $1.99 year ground lease?
No, it is for value. It's actually for appraised value.
Right. Okay. That's very helpful.
Yeah.
And I'll just add, in statute, we cannot do the discounted portion. Like, we do have to do the market rate component, which is why that lease is not going to be a discounted rate. There is statute, state entities still have to follow that, just for context.
Okay. Yeah. So we're going to get a market rate lease on the ground for the duration of the lease, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. I don't know if this is, I'm just asking. On the I'm looking at all these articles of empty office buildings in downtown Denver, wondering why we would want to pay to build another one.
Yeah, because this is an owner-occupied building that is on Auraria campus and not necessarily on the 16th Street Mall. I think if we go back to the slide on the program of that building, specifically the office building, you've got Gary Community Ventures, who will be a condo owner. AHEC will be a condo owner. MSU, CCD. And then the Early Learning Center. And so because they're not only condo owners, but they're owner occupied spaces, there's a big difference in that between versus a spec office building on the 16th Street Mall.
So we haven't really talked about this as a group before, but there are elements of this, the affordable housing and the early childhood education, that fit squarely in the target applications of these dollars that we're looking at. But then there are other elements like the office space for Gary that are not. And so how are we supposed to think about, the $5 million you're asking for, and the kind of the comfort with the lease that you're getting, knowing that there are material portions of the facility that are not fitting within the target uses. And I don't know, Natrice, if that's something for you to comment on, or because it's more of a policy and application of our responsibilities under the statute.
Right, I'll comment on that, Zach, if that's okay. So the portion of dollars that they're asking for is specific for housing. It's not that they're asking for the $5 million to help cover the broader scope. They have in the slide deck, which we'll send off to you, has the breakout of what's covering what. So the 5 million is specific, and Zach and I had talked about this prior to even coming forward to the board, is that we as stewards of the state need to make sure that the funding or any financing that we're providing fits in our pillars. And so that's why they came in with a request specific to the housing component and not to the commercial building, because that does not align with our goals. But part of this is figuring out, our return, and we still have to work through that, right? We're not going to have that today, but figuring out, what are the terms for reinvestment dollars that come back to the P3 office, to the state in our unused and underutilized cash fund, so that we can then take those dollars and do additional projects. So this 5 million is specific, and that's where they're going to make the money, is in the housing carry. To be quite honest with you, they're not going to make it in other aspects. And so they're not asking for our dollars to contribute to anything but housing. Zach, tell me if I'm wrong about that.
Yeah, no, that's spot on, Natrice. I appreciate it. I would love money for the early childhood education center, right? But the payback opportunities there, given operating margins, are so minimal that really the returns on the housing piece, which is based on our conversations, why we went on that portion.
I thought the ECE was in the same building as the housing. Am I wrong about that?
Correct.
It's in the other building?
Other building, yeah. It's on the base of the commercial. Yep.
All right, that helps.
Yep.
And I think we definitely would see the other two buildings as fairly independent, although I think there's a lot of synergy being in the same campus. So there's a lot of power there, but it's just that it's independent financially, and that the Gary part we're fully paying for. You all are not subsidizing any part of it. And I think that what we want to, I think the housing part, as Natrice said, is the most exciting part. And I do want to underscore there that eventually, if this capital stack is unheard of in the affordable housing space, essentially you're seeing state equity from Prop 123. If P3, you all come in, you're seeing mission-aligned investors like us coming into the equity stack, and you might actually have market rate investors. So you're actually making this unique structure happen, which I think is the future of affordable housing in the state. And I just want to underscore that role. We don't see capital stacks like this often, and I think that's the power. And all of us sitting in the equity stack as co-owners of this multifamily affordable housing development, I think is really, really exciting for us as Gary too. That's why we're not just looking for an office space anywhere else. This is the office space we want, because we want to look out our window and said we made that happen kind of thing, and that's exciting for us.
So Carrie, if I could just add to what Santosh just said there, because the capital stack is so unique, because the state P3 office would be involved, Gary's equity would be involved, that allows us to then now offer 64 units at 60% AMI without any LIHTC equity, right? A typical 64 unit LIHTC deal would still go to the state and get up to $40,000 per unit. In fact, I'm building 2 of those right now, and we're getting to $40,000 per unit that we don't have to pay back. And the reason for that is because it's so expensive to build, and we can't afford, we can't offer rents at those rates without having some type of subsidy, some type of additional sources that allow us to bring folks in at that level. I will come back to also the point that those 60% AMI units are being considered and targeted for faculty and staff. I mean, Zach, you can maybe speak a little bit to some of the faculty and staff needs that you have on campus, and specifically not just AHEC, but the schools and their recruitability because of how expensive Denver is.
Yeah, no, I think that's been a critical component, right? It's not just affordable housing for the community, but also certainly targeted to the extent we can to faculty, staff of the institutions at AHEC on the campus itself, which is a massive recruitment and retention tool for our staff to be able to continue to offer services we offer on this campus. So I think there's a tremendous level of excitement, certainly with the institutions, to have not only affordable housing and retail, but the opportunity for faculty and staff to utilize that housing.
So I'll just
Our state employees.
I'll just close my comment with it. It helps me to understand that Columbia is actually the lessee and not the owner, because that's my understanding now. And if I'm wrong about that, please clarify that. But it sounds like they're just taking a lease, even though it's a long lease. They're just taking a lease, which helps address my P3 concern. And the broader community benefit, honestly, I'm more concerned about making sure that those affordable units are broadly available to the community than I am that they support the university faculty and staff. To be quite honest, it's from I think our remit is broader community benefit. So,
and it absolutely is, Carrie. That's why I mentioned they're contemplated and targeted, but at the end of the day, we still have to follow FHA, and Federal Housing Act does not allow us to say only this group of people can rent these units, right? So we will still follow FHA, which means broader community will have will have these units available to them.
Thanks for clarifying that, because I'm like, we need to follow Fair Housing Act.
We will. We absolutely will.
Perfect.
That's where the 7 people in our compliance department, they will not let me move without making sure we're there.
Thank you for that. Steve, did you have your hand up accidentally, or do you just have an additional question?
No, I was asking about that land lease for value, and both the presenter and you answered that. So
perfect. Thank you. So we are at time. I'm like a stickler for time, to be respectful of everyone's time. Zach, team, everybody, thank you so much for coming and talking through this. Commissioners, what I would like us to do is, if there's any edits or additions that you'd like to make to your scoring criteria, please send those to me by next Friday. Zach, I will be in touch with you to follow up on next steps. And then thank you to your team for joining us, and thank you for answering all the in-depth questions. I know they can be kind of intense sometimes. So thank you for providing us with feedback and giving us the answers that we needed.
Yeah, no, we appreciate the time and certainly all the questions. I think they were great. So thank you to you, Natrice, and the entire committee.
Thank you. As you review our deck, please feel free to send additional questions. We're always happy to ensure that our investors know what they're getting into, and as well as happy with what we're doing. So happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. All right. As we close out, I will make the slide deck available to you also, commissioners. I'll send it to you later on today. I think in addition, the one thing that I'll work on my end, not related to this particular project, but is getting us the board book in a regular format that's more readable for you all. And then also we'll convert the scoring sheet into an Excel spreadsheet. So those are the 2 things I have that are things that I need to do for you all. And then I will adjust the time for this meeting for April to be at 8 a.m. So we'll make that adjustment on our side. And then if there's any additional things that you all have questions, thank you to the public for attending this. It's been really helpful. And I hope that you find all of our discussions and our questions really, it's part of what we're doing as far as making this process transparent, to show you that we're not just making willy-nilly decisions, but also that we got a lot of deep thought into, what type of projects we're looking at. We don't have a ton of money, but the money that we do have, we want to make sure we invest in the most equitable and feasible way. So thank you for all of you that attended the meeting today, and commissioners, thank you. And if there's no other questions, I will get back to you with all the stuff that I owe to you all today. Okay, Thank you all. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Natrice. Thanks for all your hard work.
No
Bye.
problem.
Thank you.
Bye.